Midnight blooms through Chronopolis as if the city were built from seconds rather than bricks. Clock towers shoulder the sky, their gears glittering with frost from the night air, their faces smeared with condensation that looks like condensation of memory itself. Each tower tolls in a sonnet of anxiety, the town's heartbeat, a metronome that sometimes skips, sometimes doubles, sometimes forgets to beat at all. Tonight, the tremor isn't just in the air. The clocks themselves fracture at the hinge of midnight. Fracture like glass catching a reflection that isn't yours. The first crack arrives as a whisper in Mix Calder's ribs, the synaptic tremor that sings something old and dangerous. The city's alleys drool reflections of a sky that tilts, and a neon seismograph across the water flickers with a warning in code you can only hear when your bones are listening. Nyx doesn't hear it so much as feel it, a presence beneath her skin that answers a rhythm no citizen would name. The entanglement of time with memory, the entrapment of a life within a life. The same tremor you feel when a word you've said before slips out of your mouth again, as if your tongue had learned it somewhere else, in a room you've never visited. She leans against a rain-polished pub wall, hood drawn, breath fogging in the cold, as if the air itself is exhaling a secret. The Axiom cage sits in a leather bag at her waist, a compact box of quiet violence and glittering possibility. It's not large, not conspicuous, but it hums with a patient, hungry light, a small sun tucked in a case, designed to crack open the lock of time without breaking what lies inside. The first notification arrives as a ripple in the city's surface, the kind that doesn't jolt you physically, but rearranges your options. A message appears in mid-air, a hollow sigil forming from motes of light above the street where Nyx stands. The sigil is a thin, precise thing, an eye with a dot in its pupil, and a second, smaller eye inside the dot. The message is not polite. It says, "You are observed. You are expected. You are not alone." Behind her, a street drummer bangs a rhythm into the night. 3 quick taps, a pause, a fourth. The rhythm is counting something. The sound resonates through her bones. The city's time is treacherous when it remembers you do not belong to it. Nyx doesn't look behind her. She slides the strap of the bag higher, tugs a corner of her black coat closed, and steps away from the clean, polite violence of the wall into a side alley where rainwater gleams on the stones, like a mirror made of slow question marks. The Axiom cage feels heavier there, or perhaps it's just her body, leaning into the gravity of what she's about to do. She's learned, in the course of a few years living on the run, not to tell herself what she is about to do until she's already done it, and even then to pretend the memory of the moment belonged to someone else. The city, meanwhile, keeps its promises to no one. Midnight's fracture is not a single event, but a chain of events, moments, where a minute leaks into another, where a second forgets to be one, where an hour blinks out and reappears in a different language. In Chronopolis, you don't just tell time, you steal it, you barter it, you smuggle it into fewer consequences than you deserve, hoping to get away with it for a little longer. The chase begins not with a scream, but a stillness, as if the night itself were listening for the exact sound a pair of feet make when they decide to run. Nyx's pursuer is a figure who moves with the quiet precision of a clockmaker who suspects time itself watches. Inspector Rhea Cade is not tall in the way that a person is tall. She's tall in the way a beeping alarm is tall. Clear, unyielding, in your face, and impossible to ignore. Her presence arrives as a cold wind from the river that separates Chronopolis's more forgiving districts from its harsher edges, where the neon signs glow with a harsher light, and there are fewer souls to bear witness to the truth. Rhea is waiting at the end of the alley when Nyx steps out, a Axiom cage's hum now a steady thrum in her awareness. She's leaning against a dumpster painted with the residue of old posters, advertisements for a 10-day memory cleanse, a service that promises to wash away the mistakes of a life and leave behind a memory of having lived well. The posters flutter in a breeze of noir possibility, and for a moment, Nyx considers the irony. These machines promised a cleaner memory, yet time remains a machine of unpredictability and hunger. "Nice night for a theft," Rhea says, voice crisp as ice cracking in a lens. Nice night for a line that ends in a sentence you never intended to finish. Nyx doesn't answer immediately. Words are a currency in her world, and she's learned to spend them sparingly. She studies Rhea. The detective's eyes are the kind of gray one can see through, the color of a steel hinge left to rust, the eyes of someone who has counted seconds in the dark and found them wanting. "Inspector," Nyx says at last, letting a smile tilt the corners of her mouth, the way you might coax a reluctant storm into a calm. "I've learned not to tell a detective the whole truth unless I want to see what she'll do with it." Rhea's lips remain a line. Her jacket, dark as new ink, wraps around a frame that's built for endurance. Time has not broken her. It has only tempered her, like a bell that can withstand 1,000 strikes without shattering, yet still remembers the sound of every strike it endured. "You're a thief," Rhea says, "but you're not the story this city deserves. You're a complication. You're the thing that makes time bend and cry and whisper for mercy to people who should have stayed asleep." Nyx doesn't answer, not with words, but with action. She shifts the bag so the axiom cage rests more comfortably against her hip. She starts to move, a dancer's sure instinct, guiding her through the alley's tightness. The city's fracture hums behind her, a subtle chorus of shared fear. Rhea follows with quiet efficiency, letting their footsteps trace parallel lines in the rain-slick ground. She has kept her own secrets, has learned to see through, not just eyes, but probability, the mathematical implication of who you might become if you chose one path over another. She believes that every choice is a tangle of potential futures, and the more you force the future to reveal itself, the more it reveals your own fear of losing what you've already become. "Nyx," Rhea says suddenly, not breaking cadence, "you know what the entanglement does, right? It's not just a key to another time. It's a map of your auras, a way to place your memories in a location where they can be accessed by someone else, even if that someone else exists a week or a century away." Nyx's breath fogs the air. She's done more dangerous things than talk the truth in a moment when truth might kill her. She glances back toward the street, where a crowd has gathered at the corner, curious, hungry for the show of danger, for relief from the night's ambiguity. The crowd's holographic posters flicker, advertising a new performance, the Clockwork Ballet of Temporal Erosion, an event that sells the idea of time as art, as something you watch or dream your way through. The irony of time being consumed in art while the world literally unravels at the seams is not lost on Nyx. She wonders if the world has always been this fragile, and we just learned to pretend otherwise. "Cage is not a toy," she says softly. "It's a weapon. The cage is a promise and a trap," Rhea responds. "You promised a friend a future, and you left them behind. The past is not a place you can go back to without bringing the present with you, and the present weighs more than any past you carry. The exchange feels like a prologue to something larger, a moment that will determine not just where they end up, but what they become." Nyx considers the possibility that Rhea knows what she's about to do, that the inspector has been tracking a thread that leads to Nyx's real objective, a method to undo a debt that's been owed by more people than Nyx could count. She suspects that the debt is not hers alone, that the city's time has a vendor to settle debts for every breath taken under a midnight clock. The hunt continues, and the night's fractures deepen. For a time, they move as if they're performing a dance neither has practiced, only learned on the night's edge. Nyx's steps are measured. She knows the routes that bring a person into the city's most time-choked districts, where the tower's tons hum with a higher frequency of time's true tempo. Rhea follows, not with the speed of a pursuer, but with the patience of someone who measures the probability of a perfect capture, the chance that Nyx will slip and reveal something that can be used to lock her down. Their pursuit leads to a rooftop over the river, where the city's lights ripple on the water's surface like a memory about to drift away. The skyline is a jagged crown of spires and arches, a cathedral of time that stands on the edge of a truth neither wants to admit. The city's midnight bells resound, and for a moment the air itself seems to shiver. The fracture in the time stream widens. It's as if the city's heartbeat opens its throat and coughs up a minute that doesn't belong to this hour. In that moment, Nyx knows she cannot escape by outpacing a detective who understands probability better than most people understand love. The axiom cage hums with a more insistent energy, and she makes a decision she has refused to admit even to herself. She won't run. Not this time. If she's going to gamble with time, she'll gamble on something bigger than her own survival. Take the cage, she says, voice low enough to be swallowed by the wind. But if you want it, you'll have to take me with it. Rhea's gaze is unwavering, a mirror into the future that refuses to blink. She's seen what Nyx's words signify more often than she's seen what the city's clocks have to say. She's learned to treat threats as equations to be solved, not as moral storms to ride through. Then we solve it together, Rhea says, and the word feels heavy with consequences. She steps forward, the cuffs of her sleeve catching the light, revealing a device strapped to her forearm, a compact emitter that can bend probability in a tight radius, just enough to tilt a moment or two in one's favor, a tool of the detective who knows that information is a weapon. But timing is the blade. Nyx doesn't resist as the inspector closes in. She doesn't resist because she knows that fighting will not change the outcome, but only delay it. She's learned the hard way that some battles are not about who is stronger, but about who is willing to pay the price of truth, the price being to become something else entirely. The moment is reached, not with a shout or a crash, but with a quiet collation of breaths. The city's night holds the two of them in a tight orbit, the river a black sentinel below. The towers above a chorus of unseen gears turning and turning, as if to remind everyone that a clock is never truly dummy. It is always listening. Rhea's hand brushes against Nyx's shoulder, not to pull her closer, but to steady her for what comes next. Nyx feels the touch as a spark that travels through her spine and into the axiom cage, which seems to respond with a warm, quiet resonance, like the moment a violin string vibrates with a note you didn't know you were hearing until you hear it. Open it, Rhea says, not demandingly, but as the truths demand. Open it and show me what you've learned from the past that threatens the future. Nyx glances at the device, half hidden in her coat's folds. She doubts herself, more than she ever has, not because she doubts her skill or nerve, but because she senses a wave of memory pressing forward from a place she has never visited before. A memory not her own, and yet hers, projected into her mind as if someone else has been thinking through her brain for years, leaving behind a blueprint for the future she's always feared she would become. With the other hand, she reaches for the controls. There is a moment of stillness in which the world seems to catch its breath. Then, as if the universe has decided to bend for a single decisive breath of action, the cage's luminescence blooms into a pale aurora, painting the rooftop in a ghostly light. The device opens, not with a loud pop, but with a whisper, a soft sigh of time slipping through its seams. The air around them shivers, the way heat shivers above a desert road when the air is thick with irony and potential. Inside the cage, a pocket of entangled quanta flickers, a miniature storm, a galaxy compressed to the size of a human palm. What Nyx does next is not a choice, but a consequence of a choice made long ago. A choice that would have been unimaginable if not for the city's midnight fracture and the way memory itself behaves when it's strained beyond its limits. She steps toward Rhea, and something inside Nyx shifts. The sort of shift that makes a person realize that they were always someone else. And this someone else is who they are now. It is not fear that makes Nyx wary, but a knowledge that she's about to reveal a truth that could either save the world or doom it. Do you want the past or the future? Nyx asks, her voice a thread pulled tight against the night silence. Rhea does not answer with words. She answers with a choice, the kind of choice that dictates what the night will remember about them. She leans into the cage and lays her hand over Nyx's, guiding Nix's fingers to the control panel. The device hums with a deeper resonance now, as if recognizing a friend who has returned after a long absence. "What you're about to do," Rhea says, almost in a whisper, "will rewrite everything we know about us, about Chronopolis, about time itself. If you want to erase your past to avoid a paradox, you will unravel a future you haven't earned yet. If you refuse, the paradox fetches you, and the city will devour the present to feed a past." The sentence lands between them with the soft click of truth. The wind returns, stronger, and carries the sky's pale gray light, which looks like it is trying on a new color for the first time in centuries. The city's time fractures intensify, not everywhere at once, but in a handful of places. The river district's old bridges bending. The market clock in the East End shining a shade of blue it has never had before, like the world is turning to face a mirror that didn't exist a second ago. Nix looks at Rhea and sees not a hunter, but a partner, someone who could be not an adversary, but a co-architect of a new future. For a moment, the world narrows to the two of them and the cage, and a faint, almost imperceptible scent like old copper and rain drifts up from the device's casing, reminding Nix of something she's always known but never admitted, that time runs on memory as much as it runs on law. She knows the choice is not simply a moral problem. It is a metaphysical one. It's not only about what can be undone and what can be kept, but about who they will be when the city is no longer certain which moment it's living in. If they erase the past, they erase parts of themselves that may be the only things keeping the city from breaking into 1,000 existential pieces. If they don't, time tears a little more, and every memory, in the end, belongs to everyone, whether you want to share it or not. "Let's do it," Nix says, the decision finally audible in the tremor of her voice. "Let's do it together." Rhea nods once, sharply. It's not a sign of surrender, but of resolve. She places her other hand on the cage, as if to cradle its power with both hands, to remind the device who it belongs to remind time who is in charge. The moment when they activate the entanglement is like a storm breaking inside a cathedral. Time seems to split in 1,000 razor-thin shards, each shard reflecting a possible world's future as it could be if particular events unravel in particular orders. The city's clocks, which had previously been the tyrants of mortal fate, now become witnesses. They watch as Nix and Rhea's memories and identities begin to fuse and fracture, as if the very fabric of their beings are threads in a loom that's weaving a tapestry of alternate possibilities. The axiom cage releases a pulse soft, bright, intimate, like the breath of a sleeping god who has just woken and is trying not to wake the world at the same time. Nix feels her head tilt, as if the gravity of a decision is pulling on a thread at the crown of her skull and drawing it downward into the back of her neck. The pulse travels through her, and in the moment it touches her, she experiences a jolt of simultaneous past and possible futures, memory of moments she has no right to own, because she was never there, memory of places she has never stepped into, because they exist in a version of herself that was never allowed to become. The first memory arrives as a soft rain, a memory of childhood in a village that is not in Chronopolis, but is not entirely outside of it either. A memory of a grandmother who whispered about clocks like they were living beings. The second memory arrives with the force of a river's flood, Nix's hands spanning something unthinkable, an object or a moment that could, if placed in the right context, rewrite the city's entire timeline. The third memory arrives as a person, a figure Nix recognizes in a way that is almost ghostly, someone who looks like her, yet older and more tired, with eyes that have learned to calculate the cost of every breath. Memory infiltration is not instant. It is a slow, meticulous excavation. The cage is not turning Nix into someone else completely. It's turning her into a composite, a mosaic of what she was, what she will become, and what someone else sees when they peer into her mind from across a timeline. The mosaic expands and contracts, like a living map whose geography changes as you view it. It is disorienting and beautiful, terrifying and necessary. Ria's memories begin to surge through Nix's mind as well, moment after moment of Ria's life. The long days of stakeouts, when the river was the only confidant and the night was the only friend. The times she almost believed she could walk away from this city, and the times when she'd chosen not to. The ache of losing someone who meant more than the mission, and the stubborn certainty that some futures can only be saved by accepting the costs of the choices that got you to them. Two things happen almost simultaneously, like twins sharing a single breath. One, the city's time fractures intensify in their wake, and then begin to heal in a subtler, more hopeful pattern, as if the act of choosing a future has given time permission to mend. Two, Nix and Ria discover a shared memory that neither of them owned alone. A memory of a promise broken long ago in a place neither recognizes at first, and a vow made to protect something fragile, something that matters more than any one person's life. That memory reveals the paradox at the heart of their tragedy. Nix has stolen the Axiom cage to save someone she loves, a person who is not present in Chronopolis, but who exists in a different time, a different branch of the same family's history. The Axiom cage requires a breach of the barrier between two times, a breach that can be closed only by someone paying in a price that is both intimate and terrifying. If Nix erases her past to prevent a paradox that would unravel the history of humanity, she will erase that loved one's memory as well, because the memory is bound to hers in entangled fashion. If she refuses, the paradox tears the city apart and erases not just her and the loved one, but the entire human memory, dissolving 1,000 lifetimes into a single, indifferent moment. Ria, feeling the weight of the revelation, asks a question that's not a question, but a fact she's learned to accept. If memory is the currency to buy time, who deserves to spend it? The response Nix gives is not a formula, but a decision she cannot avoid any longer. She chooses a third path, the path that doesn't erase or preserve, but redefines. If the past can be rewritten to shield the present, if a compromised memory can become a new, shared memory that does not erase but upgrades, then perhaps the future can be rebalanced without the deepest loss. The cage shifts its glow, a halo of pale light expanding to envelop them both. The city's midnight fracture becomes a visible phenomenon, a quilt of micro-layers that ripple outward from their rooftop, touching water towers, tram lines, the market's clock, the old lighthouse on the river's edge, and the spires that the city has built as monuments to the way it remembers what it used to be. The world seems to tilt again, and for a heartbeat the two of them are certain they can taste the difference between a memory that belongs to them and one that belongs to the world, a memory that belongs to everyone. Time fractures into a dozen glimmers, each glimmer a possibility. The kind of possibility that makes your heart skip a beat because you can't tell which one you'll wake up in next. They can see what the others will be like if they choose certain paths, what Chronopolis will become if they choose a future in which their lives continue along the same tracks, and what would happen if they throw open a brand new path that can't be predicted or traced. In one such glimmer, Nix stands at what looks like a classroom but feels like a sanctuary. It's a memory that doesn't belong to Chronopolis, but to a future version of Chronopolis, one where time is rebalanced not with laws and punishments, but with art, the art of letting people choose their own stories and weaving them back into the fabric of the whole. The children in that memory, if the memory can be called children, are stamping their feet, their shoes squeaking on the polished floor, their laughter echoing under a ceiling painted with constellations that resemble gears. The teacher, a woman with eyes like communication lines between two distant stars, tells them that time is not a chain, but a language. You learn to speak time, and then you can use it to tell your future to listen. Nix's breath catches in her chest. The memory is not hers, but she feels it as if she already knew it was coming, as if it has been waiting for her to remember how to say a word she's never learned before, but has somehow always spoken in her sleep. The idea of teaching time to listen becomes oddly compelling. It is not about control, but responsibility. to ensure that time speaks a language that keeps a city from breaking. Rhea looks at Nyx and sees not a thief or a fugitive, but a fellow traveler discovering a new route through a map neither of them has drawn before. The two of them share a glance that is not a vow, but a consent to proceed on the path that might save the world from its own fear of loss. They do not hold hands exactly. Rather, they hold each other's awareness steady, as if to remind themselves that they can still act as a single will, even though their lives have diverged in countless possible directions. The price, however, remains the price. The cage begins to demand something in return. The entangled quanta want a new anchor, a new focal point for their memory's gravity. If the anchor is not found, the entangled memory will begin to unravel, and with it a piece of what makes them who they are. The fear that gnaws at them is not the fear of death, but the fear of becoming unrecognizable to themselves, a ghost of a person who used to be real. Where will the anchor come from? Nyx asks. Not from a place of curiosity, but from the practical need to set the terms of what is to happen next, in a world where terms have rarely meant anything permanent. From us, Rhea replies, simply, from our future that might not exist if we do nothing. Time can be remapped by a shared map, a map drawn on the skin of our memories. If we choose to walk into a future together, the map will be drawn not just on our minds, but on the city's heart. That is the decision. They will create a shared map, a new map that will guide Chronopolis through the fracture toward a stable present that does not erase everyone's past, but acknowledges that every memory is a thread that belongs to the loon. Not a single strand to cut. As they stand on the rooftop, the Axiom cage's light spills into the night in a cascade of pale gold. The city's clocks respond, as if the act of choosing reframed the moment their hands touched the device. The tower's fracture loosens its grip, not because the time itself grows stronger, but because the choice gives it something else to depend on. Human will, wrapped in memory, interlaced with intention, a shared purpose. The first step of that shared map is to open an intertemporal corridor that will allow both Nyx and Rhea to travel to a moment when Chronopolis was not yet a city split by its own time. A moment when the decision to stabilize time was not yet necessary. It's a risk, a leap into the unknown, and it is terrifying in the way that all truly meaningful leaps are terrifying. The risk that the piece of you think you know will become something else that you cannot recognize. But the moment of decision also carries a sense of exhilaration, the sense that perhaps they're not alone in wanting to protect something that matters beyond themselves. A memory of a grandmother's whispered admonition about clocks, the memory of a teacher who insisted that time was language, the memory of a future city that might be saved if people are willing to work together to talk to time's questions rather than to silence them. Their collective memory becomes a chorus, a single voice with many timbres, and the chorus begins to sing. The intertemporal corridor opens. It is not a door, but a warp in the air, a bending of gravity that feels both mechanical and spiritual. Nyx steps through, Rhea beside her, and the rooftop dissolves into a thread of light that stretches into a tunnel made of memories and futures. They travel through a moment where the city still glowed with the promise of a stable time, a place where people did not fear the midnight fracture because they had learned to live with time the way a musician learns to live with a difficult piece of music, by listening, adapting, and continuing even when the sound becomes unfamiliar. The corridor spits them into the past's present, a city of the same people and the same towers, but at a moment when no fracture was yet evident, or perhaps only a moment behind that first fracture. They don't land in a ruin. They land in a room that feels like a memory of school, a classroom with windows that show a street at a time when the river was new and the clocks had not yet learned to argue with gravity. A teacher is there, older now, perhaps the same teacher Nyx glimpsed in the shared memory. The teacher speaks in a voice that seems to know every possible future the students might have, but chooses to speak to them as if they are about to write a sentence that will last longer than their lives. Rhea whispers. This is where it begins. Nyx nods. She understands now that the map's anchor cannot be a thing or a place. It must be a shared memory that both humans know and trust, a memory that can be anchored to a moment in time without breaking either of them. They will plant the anchor here, in this classroom, and use the anchor to guide Time's subsequent steps toward a more stable arrangement. In that room, they speak to the teacher who is both teacher and memory, and not memory's slave. They tell the story of the city's dishonesty with time, and the willingness to change that dishonesty into truth, to tell time that it wants to listen rather than to demand. Teacher listens, not with ears, but with a certainty that time yields to those who treat it with respect. The memory is planted, an act of faith rather than a calculation. A gesture of trust that the future will remember this choice and not punish them for it. When they step aside, the classroom dissolves into a bright nothingness, and they find themselves on the rooftop again. But in that moment's memory, a memory that feels newly minted. As if someone took a blank page and wrote a sentence across it that changes the entire paragraph. The anchor has been set. The city responds in a way they can barely understand, not with violence or panic, but with a careful, deliberate stillness. The fracture recedes, not completely but enough to give Chronopolis a chance to breathe, to reframe the night as something that can be endured, without disintegrating. The tower's voices, which had begun to scream time at the top of their lungs, quiet down. As if the city itself were listening to the two of them. Yet the relief is tempered by the almost unbearable ache of memory's cost. As Nyx and Rhea traverse back toward their own time, the moment where the corridor began, the sense of who they are shifts again. It's not fear this time, but a poignant recognition. The city's people will bear this new future with the weight of the past's memory. And perhaps that is exactly as it should be. The memory anchor is not a clean switch. It is a shared compromise. A compromise that says humanity can retain its history while learning to adjust to the realities of time's fragility. Back in Chronopolis, time's crack has not vanished, but it has changed shape. The towers still fracture at midnight, but the fractures no longer threaten to erase everything. They become a stage on which the city's stories can rehearse in their better endings. The clocks no longer behave like tyrants, but like cautious mentors who remind the citizens that every moment is a choice, and that every choice carries a memory that can be used to influence the future, rather than a debt that must be paid with oblivion. Nyx and Rhea, their bodies still tethered to the moment they stepped through, return to the rooftop. The city's lights glow with a muted, grateful warmth, as if Chronopolis has learned a new way to love its own time. Not by conquering it or conquering themselves, but by accepting a shared vulnerability and turning it into a courage that can withstand the night's uncertainties. They stand side by side, watching the river's endless movement and the tower's patient rotation. And Nyx realizes something she had not known she had to realize to proceed. She is not the same person who entered this night's chase. The cage has altered not just the memory's architecture, but the shape of her purpose. The person she has become is still Nyx, but with a different gravity, one that sees time not solely as a resource to be exploited, but as a living thing that can be coaxed to cooperate with the people who inhabit it. Rhea, too, feels changed not by the loss or the gain of memories, but by their new common ground, a shared sense that time's law is not written in ink, but in intention. The detective who once moved as if the city's time were a series of equations, now moves with something closer to moral gravity, a quiet determination to protect the fragile balance they've achieved. The question of the future once more returns, but this time it does not come with a demand for immediate sacrifice. It comes with a possibility that the city can carry time, not as a weapon but as a legacy of a community that refused to surrender its past to a catastrophe and refused to give up its future to a fear of loss. They descend into Chronopolis's lower districts, where the city's old arteries pulse with a more intimate memory, the memory of the first people who settled amid the towers and the river, who learned to trade time as a resource and who taught later generations that time's value lies not in hoarding but in sharing. The market's clocks have become more human, as if the merchants learned to listen to the timepieces on their wrists and to speak to them with the same gentleness that a storyteller speaks to a frightened child. The buses, which once ran on fixed moments, now glide on a schedule that's shaped by the people waiting on the curb with their own memories. As dawn glimmers in a low wash on the horizon, an odd but welcome light that makes the water look silver rather than black, Nix and Rhea pause before the Meridian Spire. It is not the tallest tower anymore, not after the night's experiments, but it remains the city's mind, a place where time is kept in check and where the people's memory threads converge to decide how to live with what they have created. The axiom cage glows faintly at Nix's hip, a quiet guardian, a tool that can still alter the world if used again, but now with a different set of rules. Rules that require consent, transparency, and an awareness of the fragile bond between memory and time. The city has learned that there are consequences to every action, and it has learned to respect the fact that those consequences sometimes propagate beyond a single life. Rhea lifts her head toward the spire and then toward Nix. Her eyes carry a question that only time can answer. Is this the end of a pursuit, or merely the end of a pursuit's beginning? The detective's mouth twitches into something like a smile that is not entirely happy or sad, but precisely honest. A recognition that their journey has become a different journey, one that does not simply end with the city saved, but becomes a promise to keep the city alive by keeping its time honest. Nix doesn't answer. She does not need to. She has learned how to listen to the world's breath and how to respond with action that is both measured and brave. The two of them walk toward the staircase that leads back to the city's heart, to the place where the public's eyes are always watching for a sign of what is possible when people choose to accept that time is not a weapon, but a resource that can be used to heal what time has wounded. As they walk, the city wakes with them, not fully steady, but whole enough to begin the long work of becoming something better. The towers toll not with fear, but with an old, patient cadence that promises patience, not punishment. The townspeople begin to believe again that their lives carry the same worth as the lives of those who have come before them, and that a future can be sculpted with memory's careful hands. Nix feels the weight of the past that she's carrying, not the weight of guilt, but the weight of responsibility. She has become the kind of person who does not simply steal time, but also returns it to those who need it, in ways that do not destroy the past to salvage the present, but instead rebalance both. It's a subtle victory, but it's a victory nonetheless. The world's fracture has not entirely closed, but it has learned to endure. It has learned to breathe without alarming the sleeping city's nerves. It feels, in a way, earned. The city's first official sunrise since the night's events threads through the sky with a pale peach color that seems to make the metal shine softly, as if Chronopolis itself has learned to glow with a gentler, more patient sense of self. The tower shafts tilt in the morning light, and the river surface resumes its routine shimmer, which now includes a faint, almost invisible shimmer of something like gratitude. The public, which had stood at the edges of the night's crisis with curiosity and fear, emerges into a day that feels more like a choice than a fate. In the weeks that follow, Chronopolis does not revert to its old routines. It adopts a new set of norms. People tell stories about what happened that night, reframing the event not as a theft or a chase, but as a negotiation with time. A negotiation that didn't end in the erasure of memory nor the destruction of future. Schools teach the memory of it, not as a cautionary tale about what happens when one misuses power, but as a parable about responsibility. That time belongs not to the rulers or the scientists, but to everyone who lives within its reach. Nix and Rhea move forward as partners, not just in a professional sense, but in a shared moral framework. They know that the city will always flirt with extremes, the impulse to rewind, to erase the past, to salvage a present. They know that such impulses will undoubtedly return in some form, but they also know that they now have a better mechanism for facing those impulses, a way to anchor time to memory without letting memory anchor time in place. They have discovered a new language for time, a language that uses memory to unify rather than to divide, a language that uses fear to drive care rather than to justify domination, a language that uses the past to teach the present how to protect the future. There is a moment, one quiet afternoon after the storm of events, when Nix and Rhea stand on a bridge overlooking the river. The water runs with its usual cadence, silver threads of light strung across the current, the city's boats sliding through as if guided by a slow, patient hand. The air smells of rain and iron, a scent that feels both old and new at once. Nix looks at the river and sees not water moving from one place to another, but time moving from what could have been to what is becoming. She feels the weight of all that has happened, the chase, the memories, the anchor's placement, the corridor's voyage, the city's new equilibrium, and she understands that the future is not a single path, but a network of possibilities, and they have chosen a route that invites others to walk with them, to contribute, to share in the responsibility of carrying time forward. "Do you think this is enough?" she asks, not expecting an exact answer. Rhea considers, then answers with something that sounds almost like a confession. Enough to keep moving, enough to keep the city from poisoning its own memory by fear. Enough to remind us that we are not alone in these decisions, that there are more future us's out there who will have to face the consequences of our present actions. If we fail again, it won't be because we didn't try. It will be because we forgot to tell the right kind of stories to the next generation. Nix nods. She feels the truth of it in her bones, what it means to be someone who keeps time honest and who learns not to trust memory's convenience too much. She looks again at the river. It is a mirror, but not the kind that shows only surface reflections. It's a mirror that reveals the city's soul, showing its capacity to heal, to forgive, to endure. The two of them stay in place for a few long breaths, listening to the river's slow, patient song, the kind of song that says there is a future to be found, and it is worth fighting to reach. They know that the road ahead will be longer, and that the fracture could reopen under stress, but they also know that they know how to respond. They know how to listen to time and how to respond to time's needs, not as enemies, but as collaborators. Time. The inhabitants begin to believe again that they can weather another midnight without losing the fabric of their own memories to a paradox they cannot control. In the end, the city's survival is not the result of an act of bravery or cunning alone. It is the product of a new shared responsibility. Nix and Rhea have learned to partner with their time rather than to dominate it. They have learned to treat memory not as a possession, but as a tool, something to shape with care, so that it can shape the future with faith rather than fear. And so Chronopolis continues. The clock towers still fracture at midnight, because time is stubborn, and stubborn times never yield easily. But when they fracture now, their memory is still intact and still oriented toward a future that is worth the risk of breaking in order to fix what needs fixing. The city's history trembles on a moment's choice, yes, but the tremor has become gentler, and the moment's weight has shifted from an existential doom to something that resembles a promise. Nix and Rhea stand on the rooftop once more, watching as dawn's pale light begins to touch the spires with a soft, golden warmth. The cage lies dormant at Nix's hip, the hum now a slow, contented purr rather than a siren's cry. The world feels larger than their own personal story. It feels like a shared memory that belongs to all of Chronopolis. A memory that will be kept not through fear, but through deliberate courage. The courage of those who accept responsibility for time's fragile beauty. The day begins with a chorus of small miracles. A baker who remembers to price loaves by not the hour, but by the smile they evoke. A bus driver who tells a joke about a clock that learned to laugh at itself, and in doing so, made the ride gentler for his passengers. A student who writes an essay about the morning light, as if it were a language learned at the knee of a timekeeper who never tired of teaching. People walk slowly, feeling the day's importance, as if every step could be a decision that one could later remember with gratitude rather than regret. And in the center of it all, Nyx and Rhea find that they have become, for Chronopolis, something more than their professional titles. They have become the city's moral memory, the living proof that time's fractures can be confronted with compassion, with trust, with a willingness to share what is most personal in order to grant everyone a shot at a future that respects what has come before. Nyx looks at the Axiom cage now resting against her side, a device that once promised to steal time and memory, but now embodies the possibility that memory can be shared without loss. A tool that can anchor time's drift without destroying the people who hold it. The word she murmurs to herself is simple, almost ridiculous in its elegance. Perhaps. Perhaps the future can be rebuilt, not from the ashes of what's lost, but from the careful stitching of what remains. From the patient weaving of a memory the entire city can recognize and cherish. It is a moment of quiet victory, not loud or flashy, but real enough to carry the weight of a lifetime. It is a turning, an ending that does not end, but rather continues, an arc that bends but does not break. The city begins to tell its story anew, and the story's narrator, if there must be one, becomes a chorus of people who learned to listen to time's whisper and answer with the courage of a shared decision. In Chronopolis, reality will always blur at midnight, but the borders between permit and prohibition, between memory and time, will be drawn with care and with faith in the future's capacity to heal its own past. And for the moment at least, that faith holds.